So it seems to me we should not be talking to the progressives, we should be talking to the moderates.
Professor Eddie Glaude was on MSNBC's Morning Joe and showcased once again why he is the elite whisperer. That is not my wording. That is the wording from Case Study QB here, who put this series of clips together from Eddie Glaude's appearance, saying Eddie Glaude, the elite whisperer, doing God's work on Morning Joe, explaining the progressive point of view. So as you'll see here, this is about the discussion around the $3.5 trillion budget bill that I've now done several videos on, where you have these two bills being pushed in tandem, the budget bill and the bipartisan infrastructure bill. The bipartisan infrastructure bill, largely a corporate giveaway, though it has some good provisions like replacing lead pipes. And the $3.5 trillion Build Back Better budget bill is the progressive-backed, but not just progressive-backed, largely Democratic Party-backed, minus Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, bill that has real investments into healthcare, into childcare, into climate change. And as you'll see here, Eddie Glaude is trying to tell it in various ways, tell Joe Scarborough why it's so important to actually invest into people. Check this out.
The civil war that we described during the campaign within the Democratic Party has made itself known now in the process of government. Progressives have been so disciplined. They have been supportive in so many ways. It makes sense that they would toe the line in this way. You know, Representative Jayapal is like, try us. It seems to me that there is a sense that they're going to draw the line with regards to this, human infrastructure.
I just wonder, though,
Well, I think first you have to generate trust, right? Remember, the infrastructure bill wasn't passed in the Senate unless there was an agreement that these two bills were going to move in tandem. So it seems to me we should not be talking to the progressives, we should be talking to the moderates. What are they doing?
What about Jim Clyburn? He says maybe 2.5
trillion.
trillion.
So it's like this, Joe. If you have an issue, let's bring it home to kitchen table issues, right? If you know something is broken in your house and you only spend $10 on it and you need to spend $100 on it, you know eventually you're going to wind up spending $200 on it.
Right.
So we know that the problems that the country faces are huge, are tremendous, and we know that the way in which we've governed over the last 40 years has led to the erosion of a social safety net that has made the American people vulnerable, that COVID-19 has revealed over and over again.
Right.
So what does it mean in this moment of crisis that we're hearing the same language, the same approach, the same rhetoric that has defined the last 40 years from the Democratic side? So it seems we got to hold our ground here.
With all due respect, trillion here, a trillion there, after a while, that adds up, right?
Sure. Just really quickly, though, to spend that initial amount of money, that scale of money, was actually a consequence of our failure to invest in human infrastructure.
Right.
It's precisely because of the absence of a robust social safety net that we had to spend as much money as we have, right, in response to COVID.
I understand.
So now that we're in this moment where we can reimagine our relation and obligation to each other as citizens, the role of government in our lives, it seems to me that we need to put in place a robust social safety net. But at the end of the day, you said there are three parties. You said there's the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, and the Insurrectionist Party. Might be four, Joe. And we're seeing it evidenced right now.
Eddie Glaude, man, he is so fantastic. And the amount of patience that it takes to have to describe this, explain this to Joe Scarborough, who clearly is playing dumb. Joe Scarborough understands Eddie Glaude's breakdown here. He understands, especially with the analogy. This is a fantastic analogy from Eddie Glaude. I think I'm going to start using this, where if something's broken in your house and you only spend $10 instead of spending $100 to fix it, you know you're going to have to end up spending $200 later on. Meaning that that thing's going to break again because you only spent $10 and you're going to have to eventually put a real investment because the issue is going to get worse. That's what's gone on with the American system, with the climate crisis, with healthcare. If there is not a real investment to begin with, you end up spending more later on. I mean, when it comes to healthcare, there was that a couple years ago, a libertarian study, right-wing study, showed that Medicare for all would actually save billions over 10 years compared to the current system. Because when everyone pays into healthcare, everyone benefits. But you don't have that perspective. You don't have these facts, this data. It's rarely ever used on these mainstream shows because these shows are on large corporate networks. And even Joe Scarborough here, who I had a video a few days ago of him criticizing Democrats for not going further on their tax plan. Joe Scarborough complaining that Democrats are not taxing billionaires and corporations enough, and he's correct to say that. But ultimately, Joe Scarborough is saying that because he himself is being taxed with the raise in the income tax plan that Democrats currently have. So, when it comes to Joe Scarborough, who is a conservative, sure, he's no longer a Republican, but he's still a conservative. These issues only bother them when it personally impacts them. So because he sees his taxes going up and not Jeff Bezos, then he's going to call for more taxes on Jeff Bezos. But when it comes to the investment here, it is so obvious what needs to be done. There needs to be, at the very least, $3.5 trillion. Bernie Sanders was actually fighting for $6 trillion, and then the people around him got that number pushed down to $3.5 trillion. So it's already a compromise. Progressives supporting the bipartisan infrastructure bill is a compromise in itself, because it is that infrastructure bill is largely a corporate giveaway, except, minus a few good provisions like replacing lead pipes, but largely it is a corporate giveaway. So in exchange for progressives supporting that, it should be a no-brainer for conservative Democrats like Manchin and Sinema to support the $3.5 trillion budget bill. But that discussion is not being had on cable news, except for people like Eddie Glaude, who points out these distinctions. And it really is, it's surprising that he's still allowed on, that they still have him on to give this perspective, even though it's not as frequent as I would like to see it. I'm sure Eddie Glaude has other things to do as well, but they need this perspective pushed more on cable news. And, ultimately here, the people side with Eddie Glaude. When you look at polling on healthcare, on universal healthcare, look at polling on climate change issues, look at polling on increasing taxes on the wealthy and large corporations, the vast majority of people are progressive economically. Now, on the cultural issues, yeah, there's some differences there, some distinctions, but it's very clear when you look at polling on economic issues, the vast majority of Americans lean progressive, want to see higher wages as well. So it's across the board. But there was no discussion of that on these networks, except for, occasionally you'll have people like Mehdi Hassan, who, of course, is largely relegated to their online network, Peacock. People like that actually spreading, knowledge. But for the most part, it's largely the morning Joes spreading misinformation, spreading the corporate propaganda view. But it's good to see Eddie Glaude here, the elite whisperer, as Case Study QB points out, on Morning Joe discussing these issues.